Welcome to hell.
I have never done anything more difficult in a video game than this challenge. I completed this challenge yesterday, being my third day dedicated to completing it, and we're here today for me to showcase to you how I made it there. Is this a guide? Kind of, but completing this challenge was so astronomically difficult, even for me using every single resource at my disposal, that I cannot in good conscience say that I can guide anyone to a successful completion of this hellhole. This was a nightmare. So I play on PlayStation, which means that by the time maintenance was over on the day that this Echo's update dropped on June 17th, 2025, I was already well deep into the night. I already knew that I wouldn't be able to get any video out before bed, but I thought, what the heck? At least I could get the footage for it, you know? Like with all my Envisaged Echo guides, I wanted to make it accessible to newer players, and my Shogun was admittedly pretty in-game. This is what I originally went in with. My talents were 9, 9, 10, which can take a lot of investment for someone to reach who doesn't already main this character. I also had a pretty good artifact lineup. Emblem of Severed Fate with energy recharge, electro damage bonus, and crit damage, with some decent substats sprinkled throughout. All around, a really great setup. Given I don't roll for 5-star weapons, I've had the catch on Shogun for as long as I can remember, as long as I've had it. So to offset some of the difference between my build and what a lower level player's build might be, I first attempted going into this challenge with a 3-star spear. Suffice to say, in hindsight, I am 100% convinced that it is completely impossible to do this challenge with this build. My Shogun is at C0, and this is one of the 5 stars that most people get to C1 or C2 if they're going to realistically be using her as one of their main characters. I'm not one of those people. I never roll for constellations, I never roll for 5-star weapons. I'm the kind of person who just enjoys having all the characters. And I thought, hey, if it's difficult, I could just switch out her spear for the catch and clear it no problem. I was a fool. This challenge immediately stands out as the only Envisaged Echo challenge so far that gives you a full team to work with. Now to me, as someone who hadn't tried it yet, this seemed like it was going to be stupid easy. I'd have elemental reactions, multiple elemental bursts to throw out, everything you could ask for. If only I could have seen the writing on the wall about why the games saw fit to give me a full team. So before we get into the challenge itself, let's look at these team members we're going to be working with, because there's some things you're going to have to keep in mind. Firstly, all of these team members are at C0 and their talents are at a base level 8 across the board, so if you think you're going to be having fun like you do in the character trials that drop with the banners, you're dead wrong. The first team member is Sarah, which is a character that I've never liked using. She's equipped with a sacrificial bow, which is completely useless as her elemental skill cannot possibly deal damage to the opponent to reset its cooldown. For those who aren't familiar, Sarah's elemental skill puts her in a state where her next aim shot leaves behind a feather that will do electro damage in AoE after a few seconds. So you'd think this would be a horrific choice of bow for her, but having one with energy recharge as its stat is actually just necessary. What's much more worthy is her artifact set. She's rocking 4-piece Noblesse Oblige, which for all intents and purposes means that whenever she ults, the Shogun is going to get a 20% damage buff for 12 seconds. The next party member is a Toma with a Kidian Cross Spear, which is something that helps with energy recharge over time. You might be seeing a theme here, because he also has 4-piece Noblesse Oblige, meaning his ult will also be buffing your Shogun's attack. It says here it doesn't stack, but trust me, you're going to be playing like it does for a few reasons we'll get to later. The last party member is the most interesting one. It's a Chevreuse with 4-piece Song of Days Past of all things, which I've never heard of anyone running on her in my life. There's a lot of text here, which can be pretty overwhelming if you're a Yu-Gi-Oh player like me, but what this boils down to is that after using her elemental skill, she'll heal the active character over time for a bit, and this set effect means that when your active character is healed from that, the next instance of damage they do will get a damage boost based on how much they were healed, which makes your sequencing kinda important! So now that we have our lineup we'll be working with, what is this challenge exactly? Well, similar to the Dia one, all you have to do is just kill a boss. Sounds pretty simple, right? I made a video about the Dia Echo challenge, which is practically a joke because of how simplistic that challenge is. Literally, all you need to do in that challenge is give your Dia whatever buffs her attack up as high as possible. And this challenge couldn't be further from that level of simplicity. In this challenge, you have to kill a perpetual mechanical array, a nightmarish boss for any challenge with a time limit, and we'll get into why that is here shortly. But technically speaking, all you have to do is kill the boss within the time limit. That's it. That's all you gotta do. By the way, the time limit is 90 seconds. I should probably mention that just for the record. The special rules in this challenge are very important. The first is that there will be phases throughout the challenge during which your Shogun's crit damage will be skyrocketed through the roof. When the challenge begins, it will be 15 seconds until the first one. These phases last 10 seconds, and after the first one, the period between them will also be 10 seconds, which on paper seems simple. You obviously want to coordinate your elemental burst with these phases, but no, it's not that simple. The second important rule here is that once every 25 seconds, when you hit an opponent with an attack, some electro-elemental particles will spawn, which you're gonna need. But now you know all about the setup. You know what characters you're gonna be working with, you know what gear they have, you feel like you've read all the text necessary to have a complete challenge. You know who you're gonna be fighting. You know the special rules for the fight. And if you think you can get away with not knowing anything about any of these things, then you're in for a rude awakening, which you can see demonstrated here by my dumbass attempting this challenge for the first time a few nights ago. As you can see, I didn't even come close, and this wasn't because of inexperience or was something that was exclusive to just my first run either. Try though I may, I couldn't get the boss down to even half health despite my best efforts, which admittedly was to be expected. After all, I was trying to use a 3-star weapon to make the guide more accessible to lower level players. But the worry began to set in when I switched to my R5 the Catch and found I was just barely able to cross the threshold of halfway. Yes, I could only get the boss about half dead with the best Shogun weapon that I had. So, why is this so difficult? At least why is it so difficult in a general sense? Let's leave the nitty-gritty at least for a little later down the line. Let's talk about this generally speaking for a moment. Well, to simplify it, this boss is one of the tankiest assholes in the game. That's problem number one. This thing's defense is through the roof, and you can tell just by watching this footage how difficult it is to make any significant progress against it. The second problem is that this thing has a wide array of attacks, some of which involve him taking off into the stratosphere where you can't even hit him at all for a couple of seconds. And there's no consistent pattern to this boss's attacks, so any ideas you may have in regards to your positioning to get him to only do the attacks you want him to do are completely off the table. Even so, if these were the only problems, I still probably would have figured things out that night. Unfortunately, then comes problem number 3. You've all fought this thing before, you know where this is going. After a certain amount of time, usually when he's around half health, give or take a little, he enters defensive mode. Now, what the hell is that? Well, first of all, once he begins this animation to enter defensive mode, you can't hit him at all. He becomes completely invincible, and all around him, ruin mobs will begin to spawn. This spawning process is long and tedious, and they take their sweet darn time as if they're acting out some incredible cutscene or something like that. and it's an absolute killer obstacle to have to overcome on a challenge with a strict time limit like this. All but one of these mobs are gonna be completely invincible, and the one mob you can kill will need to be killed before you can attack the boss again. Problem is, well, you know, the problem besides the fact that it takes forever between the animation of him starting this mode and the period of time when you can actually start to attack the mobs in the first place. The problem besides that is that just like his attack sequence, there's no way within your power to control which mob it is you're gonna have to kill. And there are some instances where you are immediately screwed. In particular, the mob which just buries itself underground, making it even longer before you can attack it than usual, is oftentimes just an immediate death sentence and a signal to just reset the run. This scumbag crab over here, not only does this asshole move across the map at max speeds, but he also has incredibly high defense himself, making him oftentimes an obstacle that takes too much time to overcome as well. But once you beat the mob, you think you're in the clear because the boss isn't going to go into this mode a second time. As an added bonus, once you get him out of this mode, all of his elemental resistances go down the tubes. So you may think, with a few attempts, you can just get him here early enough to just wail on him until he's dead, and no. He recovers from this vulnerable state after a while, and when he does, there's a few seconds during which he is, once again, just completely invulnerable! Meaning you're not gonna want to be using an ult or something here lest you waste precious resources and whiff a big ult's worth of damage for no reason, and when you can hit him again after he's done with this seemingly random phase of invulnerability, his crazy high defenses and resistances are back up! So to make a long story short, it didn't take long for me to realize just how many obstacles there are to overcome and things to account for in this challenge, and it became all too clear all too fast that this would take more strategizing than I had time for that night. A lot more. Day 2 didn't start well. Even energized and with a refreshed mindset, I wasn't making it any further than the night before. Things looked grim. The first thing I did was take a much closer look at the kits of the trial characters to see if there was anything super noteworthy that I missed, to which I found not really there wasn't. I knew how Sarah's elemental skill worked, and I knew that Chevra's healed you with her elemental skill, and that worked with her artifact set to give you a little boost, and it looked like you were supposed to use Toma and Sarah's ults to give the Shogun a well-timed attack boost for her ult, which you were probably supposed to use in unison to like get that boosted ult when the Thunder Surges began and you got the big Shogun crit damage from the challenge, and timing all of this is just much trickier than it sounds, and it already sounds like there's a lot of moving parts to it. For one thing, every one of these trial characters has an elemental skill with a really long cooldown, the only exception being Sarah's, which might as well be a really long cooldown because you have to aim and shoot after using it. There was also the problem of ult charge. I was using Emblem of Severed Fate on Shogun, and that combined with the catch meant that I really didn't have to worry about her ult charge, but everyone else was a different story, and they were kinda important. After all, you wanted to use the Shogun's ult after Toma's or Sarah's to ensure that every time that the Shogun ults, she's gonna get that damage boost from the Noblesse Oblige, which, I don't know if you've been paying attention to this health bar, but any amount of damage boost you can get is essential. But guess what? Realistically, you are only gonna have one ult besides the Shogun's fully charged by the time the first Thunder Surge comes 15 seconds into the challenge. So the ideal scenario of dumping all 4 ults into the boss just wasn't gonna happen with me being unable to edit the kits of any of these trial characters' gear. So instead, I began to focus on sequencing. What did I want to do most? What was the most effective way to switch between characters? What was the best order in which I could use their skills? Chevra's ult was by far the least important given the fact that she didn't have Noblesse Oblige, so my initial plan was to get either Toma's or Sarah's ult for every Thunder Surge and use at least one of them in unison with the Shogun to buff her for when she was ready to ult in each surge. That didn't really work out. Why did that not work out, you ask? Because, my friend, on the cycles where you're using Sarah's ult to buff the Shogun, you're not going to be getting any pyro for elemental reactions, meaning that even with the Noblesse Oblige buff, your DPS is going to be taking a massive hit to the jaw. And that's even if you get the most ideal crit RNG. That's another thing that I was beginning to realize as day 2 dragged on. Getting good crit RNG is so important in this challenge. There were so many runs that weren't even winnable at all, even if I had a perfect strategy and executed it perfectly, because getting a crit on the initial hit of the Shogun's ult is just so important for a boss with this kind of survivability, and I just didn't get that. So to recap that, not only do you have to play perfect with a perfect plan, but you also need to have good luck. Either that or have Constellations or her signature weapon. But that wasn't really an option for me. I was at C0 and with no 5-star spear to work with, and I couldn't change that because obviously Shogun doesn't have a banner right now and God only knows when she's gonna get one again. Not that I wanted to do that anyway. I still hate rolling for Constellations and weapons, but anyway, I began to recognize that Toma's ult was by far the most important one to charge up, because his ult would not only give Shogun the Noblesse Oblige buff, but it would also be providing constant pyro for elemental reactions. But there's some problems with that. Toma is equipped with a bloody Kidian's Cross Spear, which is great for energy recharge in the long run, but for the immediate start of the challenge, it's very difficult to get him ready to ult with the Shogun in time for the first Thunder Surge. That's a 15-second window, and that's not the only problem either. Toma's elemental skill generates a shield, which is usually good, but guess what? If your character has a shield, they don't take damage. What happens if your character doesn't take damage? Severus's elemental skill will have no health to heal, making the damage bonus from her artifact set impossible to get. This is when I started to realize that the sequencing required here was kind of criminally insane. But I worked at it over and over, trying to find out which order of switches and order of elemental skills was correct. Trying this or that to maximize the amount of elemental reactions I got, trying to alternate the pyro characters with the electro ones, all kinds of crap. Throughout this process, there was also a lot of little things that I began to realize slowly but surely too, such as making sure to do 2 basic attacks near the beginning with whoever I wanted to give energy recharge with, to give them all those electro particles from the challenge's second special rule, or whenever the boss goes up in the air, that is probably the ideal time to switch to Sarah and use her elemental skill, because doing so and then having to aim and shoot takes more time than any other tool in this team's kit, and also the shot doesn't have to hit the boss itself to explode into the AoE. This is also the best thing to do when you're waiting for the mob to spawn and become damageable, something that's indicated by the health bar appearing over its head, because it's not like you can hit anything else during this time. Just for the record, in case anyone doesn't know this, you can tell which mob it is you're gonna have to kill by the circle of runes that's going around it as it's spawning. So developing little habits like these to maximize the use of your time really started to help me get closer and closer to a completion. But still not close enough. I was still scratching 70, maybe 75% completion rate, which still wasn't even close. And I began to have a good idea why. My strategy of alternating ults between Toma and Sarah to buff the Shogun during the storm surges simply wasn't the move. When the Shogun was buffed from the Thunder Surge, that was the time to just dump everything into the boss and get as much damage as possible. Admittedly a little beforehand, the timing here is very important. Your other characters needed to do all their skills and bursts while the Shogun's elemental burst is on cooldown, and you really want to try to time it so that when you switch to the Shogun, her ult will be ready the instant that the surge starts, so that you maximize your time on the Shogun while you have the buff from the Thunder Surge and the buff from the Noblesse Oblige sets as much as possible. There was also the matter of energy recharge. recharge. Every single point of damage you do to this boss is so important, and saving one of your ults for later on at any given point in time is a precious waste of energy recharge that would, by the end of the challenge, ultimately result in you having ulted one less time than you would have if you didn't just save it, and that's not a waste you can afford. Sure, maybe you can get away with waiting just a couple of seconds for the surge to start, or making sure that your timing for some specific play is just what it needs to be, but waiting an entire cycle just so that you have another Noblesse Oblige ult to buff the Shogun was just too much energy wasted. But you just had to do it, because there is no way to get both Toma's and Sarah's ults fully charged in time for the first thunderstorm with these trial kits. And if you just waited with them until the second thunderstorm so that you could use both their ults with the Shogun then, well then guess what? You wasted that whole first thunderstorm Shogun's ults worth of buffs and elemental reactions, and basically a huge opportunity for an outburst of damage, which you need as many of as possible here, and desperately needed, and you can't afford to do that. So what do you do? What do you do? What did I do? That's the question here, right? What did I do? Well, I'll tell you what I did. I quit. Well, I didn't really quit, but maybe I should have. Basically, there was no way for me to clear this challenge with the current parameters. There was just no way. So I started looking for something, anything, that could buff my Shogun to give me even the slightest edge in this challenge. The first thing I did was obvious. It was fortunately a Wednesday, so I was able to farm some light books to crown her 2 remaining talents that I didn't have at level 10, but as you could probably guess, that wasn't enough. So I started trying some different weapons, hoping to find something better than the catch. I do have a single 5-star spear. Maybe that would give me the edge I desperately needed. Maybe I could try one of the spears that gave attack, maybe, or crit damage. Something to help me make it there. And surprise, surprise, I couldn't find anything. Nothing is better than the catch. Unless you have an event 5-star spear. I was getting desperate at this point. So when I realized that, I did something I never do, ever, under any circumstances. I rolled on the weapon banner. That's right, there was a spear featured on the weapon banner, and I thought maybe a 5-star spear could be what I needed to succeed. Fortunately, I did not whiff on Skirk, so I had the Primo Gems necessary to go for it. 10k Primo Gems later, I fortunately did not whiff on the weapon banner either, and got the spear, leveled it up, took it to the challenge. Only to find out that it did not help at all, and the catch was just strictly better. For you see, this spear is designed for an off-field character like Shinha or Emily, and didn't help the Shogun here whatsoever. I knew this when I rolled for it, but it's not like I had many other options that I hadn't tried yet. I was completely out of ideas, and rolling for this spear was a testament to my desperation. There had to be something else I could do. Something I must have missed. I began to review the other Envisaged Echo challenges and observed a common theme transpired whenever I hit a roadblock, being switching over to a different artifact set intended specifically to clear that challenge. Most of the time, one focused strictly on attack and DPS. Believe it or not though, my first idea was the 4-star artifact set of the Scholar. This set gives energy recharge to party members when the equipped character gains elemental particles, meaning that it could potentially help both Sarah and Toma get their ults in time for the first Thunder Surge. But the problem is that not only would this set only give it to Sarah because it only distributes this energy recharge to characters with bows or catalysts, but the Shogun's kit is the only one that I can mess with, and a 4-star artifact set just wasn't gonna cut it with the amount of damage that I needed to output to kill this stupid thing. I needed more damage, and that statement brought me to Thundering Fury, much like how it had led to Carrara stealing my Nahida's Deepwood Memories artifacts for her Envisaged Echo challenge. You see, Thundering Fury not only gives an electro damage bonus, which is literally all of Raiden's damage, but it would also boost the damage of the pyro elemental reactions from Toma and Chevers by 40%, which is a lot. I figured it was worth swapping out the Emblem of Severed Fate set for them because the catch still seemed to be the best weapon I had for her, and that just wasn't gonna change. That meant she was already gonna have a ton of energy recharge, and I was hoping the boost to the damage she would be doing with the elemental reactions thanks to the pyro characters would outweigh the boost that Emblem of Severed Fate was giving to her elemental burst. I wasn't sure that this was the case, but I just didn't have any other ideas at this point. But even if, theoretically, it was the case, there was still a problem with that, being that I didn't have the best Thundering Fury artifacts just laying around. There's only 1 or 2 characters I actually used this set for, so I didn't have a bountiful wealth of options available to me to try out in this challenge, which meant it was time for artifact grinding. That's right. For a set I wasn't even 100% sure was better than the one I was currently using. It was about at this time that I made that post on my channel discussing why I hadn't posted a guide yet and mentioning that I might not even be able to do this challenge, which didn't reach that many people ultimately because I got multiple comments on my most recent case tier list video asking for this guide, which were the only comments on that video. Please, if you like Ace Attorney or Danganronpa, please go check those out. I worked really hard on them, but I really feel like the game might have bested me. I started artifact grinding that night and actually looked up some guides and looked up how other people had cleared this challenge on the side. Like I mentioned in that post, every single person who I watched either had Raiden's signature weapon or a powerful 5-star alternative, or her constellations, or more often than not, both. The only useful piece of information I got from these other videos and guides is that when you're ulting as Raiden, using charged attacks is better than normal attacks, which I wouldn't have thought given the frequency of how fast she does her normal attacks when in her ult, but of course stamina has to play a part in every high level strat ever, so I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised. It is worth noting that I tried some runs before finishing the artifact grind to see if the charged attacks made that big of a difference, and they did not. It made a difference, sure, but it was a small one, and nothing that would help me avoid the seemingly inevitable artifact grind. Anyway, that little charged attack tidbit is all I really got from watching anyone else do the challenge, so I headed to bed late into the night of day 2 with plenty more artifact grinding needing to be done the next day. The morning of day 3 was spent finishing the artifact grind. Thankfully, I had a ton of fragile resin, like literally over 100, and this update made it so that you could use them directly from your inventory. So that really helped shave some time off the grind of getting some decent artifacts. After a few hours and 40 to 50 fragile resin later, I finally had some that I was happy with, and after spending the rest of the fodder that I'd gotten throughout the grind maxing them out, it was time to head back in. I was happy to see that some improvements were being made, but I still peaked at around 80% of his health, which was of course still a massive gap between that and a completion. Left with no other outside improvements I could make, I set my mind to figuring out how to optimize sequencing and actually doing the challenge itself as best I could, which wasn't easy given how many factors that I had to adapt to on the fly, with the boss just flying away on some runs just whenever he wanted, and like always changing the identity of which mob I had to kill, and some of his attacks like the laser beam attack making the amount of time that's left in the challenge when he goes into the defensive mode never consistent. All this crap made testing what times and places were definitively the best to use your ults super inconsistent. There were some runs where it felt like using your ult to kill the mobs was just necessary, and other runs where it felt like it would be a complete waste to do that, and saving them to dump into the boss after it was killed was just strictly better, and there was no great way to consistently compare them, especially with critting being a completely random percentage-based factor. I have never in Genshin Impact and I've played almost every day since release, never felt like I needed to crit anywhere in any other Envisaged Echo challenge or anything else I've done in the game ever. But it felt like I did here. Like I mentioned, given the boss's seemingly random attack sequence, it never goes into defensive mode around the same time on the timer, meaning your ult charge is going to be all over the place from attempt to attempt. Getting into a consistent rhythm here is really difficult. I cannot stress that enough. And even on my best runs, I just couldn't make it past 80%. This was mainly owed to the fact that even if I improved my damage a little and optimized my play, there was still no definitive best game plan for whose ult to use and when. And what's more, a brand new problem began to arise. With the Shogun using Thundering Fury now, it became extremely difficult to get enough ult charge for both her and one of the Noblest Oblige characters to ult together in time for the first thunderstorm 15 seconds in. So much so that it was looking like I might have to go back to Emblem of Severed Fate just so I didn't waste that first thunderstorm. Like I said, at around this point, I've been peaking at approximately 80% of the boss's health. But the number of resets was also drastically increasing, making close attempts further and further apart. Not that 80% was that close to a completion anyway. I was stuck. Genuinely. And it was me just being stuck there, effing around, that I discovered something that changed everything.
Stop right there.
That is right. Chevreuse, for some reason, generates ult charge when using her elemental skill, even if it doesn't hit anything. This immediately renewed my mental and opened up tons of possibilities. This meant that I could start the challenge with a character having an elemental burst ready for use immediately. Unfortunately, yes, it was Chevreuse, the character without the Noblest Oblige buff and therefore the least important on the team, but this was still a massive boon. Upon discovering this, I tried everything I could to generate energy with anyone else on the team, but unfortunately to no avail. I recalled the Exile artifact set, the set that I have on Goro right now, that regenerates energy to the party when the wearer uses an elemental burst. Unfortunately, Chevreuse was a trial character whose kit I couldn't alter because otherwise I could have put that set on her and I could have started the challenge with everyone having full ult charge. But unfortunately, we can't have things that nice. Regardless, this made my game plan going forward very clear. If I could start the challenge with Chevreuse having full ult charge, that meant that I didn't have to worry about juggling elemental particles between the Shogun and a Noblest Oblige character during the 15 seconds between the start of the challenge and the first Thunder Surge, and instead just give all the particles to RAIDEN, completely negating the downside that came from switching to Emblem of Severed Fate to Thundering Fury. The only drawback to this was that I wasn't going to have a Noblest Oblige ult for the first surge, but that was offsetted by the fact that I would have a Pyro ult to trigger a reaction to during it that wouldn't mess up Toma's and Sarah's ability to ult together with the Shogun during every subsequent surge. A Pyro ult, I might add, that had its elemental reaction damage buffed by the Thundering Fury set that I had switched the Shogun to. It was like everything was coming together. Unfortunately, this came with a drawback of a new kind, being that now I had to wait about 2 minutes in between attempts to use enough elemental skills with Chevreuse to get her full ult charge. So failing was getting a lot more frustrating because I couldn't try again right away, and it was definitely taking a bit longer, but I finally had all the pieces I needed. All I needed to do was play perfect and get some decent crit RNG and, well, ignore my friends talking in the PSN party while I play Elden Ring, and take a look.
think I got
Holy
it!
damage. Genshin coming.
I think I got it!
Locked in.
Ah, we made it there! Let's go! Holy crap!
Congrats, buddy. Your reward, Primo Jam.
Give me those effing Primo Jams! You have no idea how hard I had to sweat for this!
It wasn't as hard as I sweat for Jad. Just like that.
Maybe not.
Well, contrary to what Ryan said, I did not in fact get any Primo Gems. But this Envisaged Echo looks absolutely fire and feels like one of my biggest accomplishments in gaming. C0, no 5-star spear, no problem. Okay, that's bullshit. There was tons of problems, a countless number of problems. But if any of you are struggling with this challenge, then to you I say, good luck. I'm not even sure if following my completed attempt is the best thing to do or not. It can all depend on how long the boss takes to enter defensive mode, or if he goes into the sky or not. Heck, just the identity of which mob you have to kill can determine big differences, such as if it's better to use your elemental burst on the mob to kill it faster, or to save them for the boss, if that would make it ultimately faster. And I'm sure as hell not doing this anymore to find out. Not only has this challenge dethroned Deluxe as the most difficult one, it has done so by miles, light years, whatever outlandish unit of measure you want to use. I am convinced there will never be a more difficult Envisaged Echo challenge than this. Mark my words, I guarantee it. I suppose the only thing I really have to say is, if I can do it, you can do it. Anyone can get the catch. Anyone can grind artifacts. You don't need constellations. You don't need banner weapons. You already have all you need. Now get in there and just do it. You got this. Or not. The challenge is kind of just bullshit.